Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale, as well as the latest episode of Deadly Class. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Riverdale, you can skip to what I say about this week's episode of Deadly Class. But the first thing I want to talk about is this week's episode of Riverdale, a very interesting episode. I like the aesthetic of this episode being very noir, like obviously like even having Jughead kind of play the role of detective, but like obviously there's like three main plot lines we're kind of following. Obviously there's Archie's plot line where it's basically he's dealing with everything. It's just, you know, he can't find him, like he's lost, you know. It's just like he's holding on to all this anger and just wanting to smash stuff. It's the only thing. He's very destructive right now, very self-destructive, you know. His dad's like, oh yeah, you can work at the construction site, but he kind of screws that up because he gets pissed off at the dude, because the dude, you know, because I guess it's just he's just pissed right now, and it's just he doesn't have the best outlet for his anger, so he ends up lashing out at people. He's drinking a whole bunch. And it's interesting to me that the person that ended up bringing him back was Josie. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. That almost seemed like that came out of nowhere. But to be fair, I guess in retrospect, it kind of makes sense because Josie, I guess, is one of those early connections he had that, you know, it's just kind of like they made music together and stuff like that. He would jam with her and the Pussycats. And, obviously she had her reservations about Archie from the beginning. But at the same time, I think it's just like, I don't know, maybe she on some level can understand, because obviously, like, you know, Josie's life isn't all that great. She's always kind of had a complicated, especially with a complicated relationship with her dad. Maybe she kind of knows a thing or two about all the anger that's kind of consuming him to some degree. And so, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting that she reached out to him like that. I thought it was kind of fascinating. Because Archie, you know, because everyone else is kind of dealing with their own thing while Archie's kind of dealing with his alone. And obviously he doesn't have Veronica there, and probably Veronica not being there, you know, in his life. You know, her being with Reggie, that kind of probably complicates things even more. But it's just kind of interesting. I'm like, are they setting up the whole him and Josie situation? Because it seemed like that's potentially the direction they're heading. Or maybe it's just purely going to be a friendship thing of like she's there to extend a helping hand, nothing more, and never go beyond that. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Even if it did, it probably complicated, just because, like, you know, Josie would probably be like, yeah, you got your issue, you got a whole bunch of issues. The last thing I want is that kind of being part of my life. So that potentially could be a conversation we see happening, but nevertheless, it's interesting because Archie, for so long, he was thinking like, okay, I did it. I faced my demons. I literally killed them. I killed that weak part of myself. Yet here I am. I'm still so angry. I'm still being dragged down by it. It's like, you know why? Because I haven't faced my true demon, like, you know, in real life. And he goes to confront Hiram. Brings a gun because he thinks like the only way he's going to make this right is by killing Hiram, because it's just kind of like Hiram is that one nagging thing that keeps dragging him down. To be fair, who knows what would have happened if he actually killed Hiram? I mean, I doubt it would make it go away, because the fact is you're already haunted, it was going to haunt him even more if he crossed that line. I guess he kind of lucked out that someone else showed up to try and finish, you know, Hiram off, because if someone else hadn't done that, he would have done it himself, and, you know, that would have changed everything. Like I said, no matter where him and Veronica stand, like, she would never forgive him. And that's also something I want to talk about, too, is a whole interesting aspect of the fact is that Veronica, you know, shows so much concern for her dad, even though they have the complicated relationship they do have, because I think at the end of the day, that's still her dad, no matter what. You know, she still loves him despite all the evil, terrible crap that he does. I mean, I think that's the whole complicated nature of family, is that you know, that unconditional love, you know. Even when conditional stuff comes up, it doesn't, you know, quite crumble, you know. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. But nevertheless, so Archie comes off looking like the hero, but, you know, it's kind of like, oh man, I was so lucky that you were here. Hiram is so lucky you were here. It's like, yeah, lucky, huh? I mean, I guess it is lucky both for Archie and Hiram. So interestingly enough, Hiram does wake up and he's like, okay, you and me, Archie, we're good. A stalemate. A truce. The fact of the matter is, you don't come after me, I won't come after you. So that's where things stand currently. To be fair, I mean, I don't know if I was thinking like Hiram's going to know the truth. He's like, oh, you tried to kill me, but the fact is you didn't. I mean, because no matter what, even if he found that out, it still shouldn't change. The fact is that Archie saved his life. It's like, it would have been so much easier if Archie let someone else do it. But the fact is he did that. Why didn't he? He could have easily just stayed back and let someone else do it. So why? because I think even he recognized this isn't the right thing to do. Or maybe the darker side of that is like, no one's going to kill Hiram except for me. That could be something that went through his head at the time. And there's no telling what Archie could have been thinking in that moment. You want to give him a benefit of the doubt, think like, oh, he had the best intentions of like, no, I can't do this and I won't let anyone else do it, you know? Even looking back at Hiram like that, maybe it kind of made him second guess, like, what am I doing, you know? Almost crossing that line again. Or like I said, the darker side of it being like, no one's going to kill you except for me, you SOB. So that's one side, I think. So that's interesting. But even him and Josie, they're going to jam together. He's potentially going to work with Keller, you know, at like boxing and stuff like that. So I'm like, I don't know. It's very interesting to see things kind of end up where they are for Archie in that regard. I mean, that's just one facet of this episode. The other aspect, another being the whole Jughead situation. You know, we learned so much, you know, from his and Betty's investigations. So for one, like Jughead ends up, you know, Jughead and Betty found out about the Maple Club. It's not, you know, it's like, oh, she's supposed to be running a brothel, but it's a brothel, but not to the extent. It's more of a dominatrix club. But just like, oh, that's interesting. So it turns out, because obviously, you know, Betty's been conversing with her dad, Hal, about the whole situation of life. There's all these people dying around, you know, Penelope Blossom, and it's just like, oh, Claudia's now dying. Because even Nana Rose isn't buying that. She's like, oh, those crocodile tears when Penelope's crying about Claudius. And it's like, okay, so what's that all about? Okay. There's a lot to kind of unpack about that, because it's so interesting, because the fact is that Betty's literally going to her serial killer father for advice about this situation, even him being like, you know a lot about Penelope's situation. The fact that she likes to poison people. The fact of the matter is a lot of people happen to kind of die. Suicide around her. So who else did? And it's like, well, Clifford did. But he hung. It's like, well, what, did he really hang himself? Or is there more to the story? Investigation and stuff like that. Reveals the fact of the matter is he was killed by pufferfish poison, but that's not the same poison that other people have used. I mean, that Penelope has used before now, but maybe it's just because at the time she hadn't really found out what her thing was. I mean, obviously her thing is poison, but she's probably only recently come up with the whole system of like, oh, how am I handle that situation? So it's actually interesting, the conversation between Betty and Penelope in that regard of like, oh yeah, like, you know, I know what you did, and it's because Penelope talks about all her targets being men, because all the men that she killed were terrible people. It's like, oh yeah, Clifford, yeah, he killed my son. Of course I'm going to put him down. Even saying Claudius, because Claudius is the one who caused the seizures. Because basically when the whole production of Fizzy Rocks is being made, the runoff from it was going into Sweetwater. But at the same time, it still doesn't answer, well, they never really clarified why wasn't only girls getting sick. I didn't even notice that until Betty pointed out. I was like, holy crap, there haven't been any male victims, haven't they? They've all been girls. I did not notice that or even pay that much attention to that detail. I was like, that's such an interesting thing. I didn't even notice that until Betty pointed that out. It's like, why was that specifically? I don't know. But because even, you know, Penelope shrugged it off as like, I'm a herbalist. I, you know, don't know anything about chemicals. But I do love the fact is that she kind of twists things on Betty. It's like, oh, your dad, Hal? He told me all about the chick situation of you handing him over to, you know, the Black Hood, you know, him, Hal. And so now they're kind of in a stalemate as well, because it's like, I'll keep your secret as long as you keep mine. Like, the fact is, you try and take me down, I'll take you down. And the whole thing has kind of gotten Betty kind of looking at things differently, because Betty is very big into the whole justice situation. The fact of the matter is, for her, things are clear, black and white. She doesn't really look at things as shades of gray. And so for her, it's like, you know, she almost feels bad for Penelope, because, you know, and even Hal kind of explains it of being like him and Penelope. It was kind of how they were raised, and they were raised to believe, and just like the crappy family situations that they had led them to be who they are. And now, you know, you have her being like, not all victims are innocent, and, you know, not all killers are bad people. And even Hal being like, one day I hope you kind of look at me in that same light of there being kind of shades of gray. But it's like, maybe that's the whole point. I mean, because I think you're letting it slip. The fact of the matter is, the only reason why Penelope has a leg up on you in this situation is because your dad ran his mouth off to her. So, but I think because Betty's just so easily swayed by what he's saying that she's not really paying that much attention to that little detail. I mean, maybe she did and she just didn't think too much of it, but it's like she's still letting her dad sway her, and it's kind of interesting. Because I guess in my mind, I can understand where, like, Betty's coming from in that regard of, like, well, the fact of the matter is, it's not like she's killing innocent people. These are terrible people. So is it really that bad? You know, because it's like, oh, yeah, there's some terrible people that are better off not being around. So I think we're starting to see, Betty's sense of justice slowly shift over into a very dark shade of gray, where it's just kind of like, rather than just kind of arresting someone, maybe it's just better to kind of just putting them down, kind of like making comic book comparisons and stuff like that, kind of a very Punisher route of things, of just like be a permanent solution rather than a band-aid to the situation, So I just think that's kind of fascinating what they're doing. I mean, to be fair, we already know, like, the series has already, since the beginning, shown us Betty's darker side, and I feel like this and her dad's really tugging at those strings. Like, we haven't seen Dark Betty in a while, and that might be something we see kind of pop back up. I mean, to be fair, like, that's just kind of like a manifestation of who she, like, the darkness bubbling underneath her, and I'm curious, is that going to manifest itself? Because we haven't seen that this season. It's been a little while since we've seen Dark Betty, but I'm curious if that will ever come back again. Maybe if she ever goes down the darker route and kind of does that herself, or potentially could go down that route, maybe that's when we could potentially see Dark Betty. Like, maybe her whole thing is like she shifts into another personality to deal with, like, stuff like that. Potentially, maybe not. I don't know, but that in itself is fascinating. Now, all of that is one big mess all on its own, and then another mess on top of that is, Jughead. I should have known, like, it was definitely, like, pointing towards Hermione, because, like, she gave two different stories this episode, because when Jughead confronted her, she was all about, like, oh yeah, this whole thing was about an affair, and obviously she didn't shoot him. It's kind of like, oh, Hiram ended the affair and stuff like that. It's like, okay. I was like, it just seemed like that wasn't, because I don't think Hermione would even care about an affair. She's like, oh, I got Sheriff Mineta to do this before he died. And I was like, okay. Later on, it kind of makes sense. I guess it's like, that wasn't blackmail for, like, it wasn't meant to be like, oh, he's cheating on you. That was probably meant to be blackmail to be used against Hiram later on if everything kind of didn't fall into place. But then she immediately later on kind of tells the truth to Veronica about everything, of, like, because she tried to be like, oh, the promise that was broken, that Veronica overheard was, oh, this affair. But it's like, no, it's because Hiram was doing a lot of stuff behind her back. Like, I brought that up. Like, she was not aware of a lot of stuff he was doing. In particular, it turns out, like, the whole drugs, the Fizzle Rock thing, she had no idea about that, and she doesn't support it, which is interesting considering the fact that she later on was like, yeah, let's sell it. And it's like, what? She's like, yeah. It's like, but now in retrospect, it's like, now we understand why she was willing to sell it. It's because she had already sold it. She had made that decision. She's trying to act like it was a decision between her and Veronica. It's like, no, you made that decision on your own. It's like you don't agree with it, yet you're still trying to profit from it. She's like, oh, after all the stuff that they've done, after all the stuff that Hiram's done, like, shouldn't we get paid for what he's put us through? It's like, and once again, it's that thing of, like, like, when you compare Hermione, I keep doing it, Hermione to who she was in season 1, it's crazy, because it's like, you saw her with shades of gray, you kind of felt sympathetic for her, but now you realize, like, she's kind of just as much of a monster as Hiram is, just kind of, like, willing to do whatever it takes. Like, she's just as much of a mobster as he is, so she's not kind of being as controlled in this situation as you think she is. I mean, she's kind of, tiptoeing that balance herself, because, like, if this situation came down to it, she definitely feels like Hiram would take her out in an instant if she kind of got in his way, or at the very least he ever found out. But then, like, Jughead had Sweet Pea following Hermione, and it turns out, hey, Mineta is still alive. I'm like, jeez, does no one in this town stay dead? Which is like, well, yeah, a lot of people stay dead, but it was just kind of like, man, there was a whole decapitated head. I mean, I guess that was the whole point. The question is, who's the poor bastard that got his head cut off to fake that and everything? So it's like, oh, that's kind of a shame. I wonder who the hell that was. Probably just some random person that it doesn't matter, but it's like, I think that should matter the most, that whole situation. But nevertheless. But then it turns out it is Hermione behind all of this, because she's planning on framing FP. But it turns out she doesn't have to do too much framing, because FP is the one who pulled the trigger. Because it's like, because of everything that happened with the Ghoulies and Penny last season, when they literally almost beat Jughead to death, it's like that was all because of Hiram. And so like FP's just been biding his time, waiting for an opportunity. Hermione wanted him going anyway too, so it's like, hey, it's a win-win situation. I become sheriff, which was my reward. This way I put myself in a position where I'm a lot more protected, that Hermione can't come after me and double cross me. Lo and behold, she doesn't anyway. I was thinking like, oh, maybe there's kind of like some love affair situation going on between them or something like that. It's like, no, this seems like this is what they've been planning and what they've been up to the entire time. But I love how Jughead spins this situation. It's like he helps with the tall boy situation and uses it in this case to help FP. So Tall Boy is the one that's behind everything related to all of this happening. And it's like, oh boy. So everything is tight, like all nicely, you know, tied up in a little bow. There are literally 3 cellmates all across the board. Archie and Hiram, Betty and Penelope, and now, you know, Hermione and Jug, because now they've both gone on a record. FP secured his own safety, but also Hermione's, because if Hermione tries to like drag him down, she gets dragged down too, because she made this official statement about the whole tall boy situation. So makes you want to know, how much did Alice know? I'm sure like Alice knew nothing. They probably just told her like, oh no, this and that, so that's how they're gonna lump it together, even kind of making it seem like tall boy was the one behind it. But it's like, what, you know, I don't think Hiram's really gonna believe that, and maybe he will, I don't know, just because it feels like for him, I mean, because we never actually got to see the crime scene, so it's like we don't know how far FP was away before when he shot Hiram. Like, you know, did Hiram get glimpses of it or something? Because he might know the truth, and that might kind of set everything in motion. Because the fact of the matter is, like, he might be playing, you know, possum. Because the fact of the matter is, if he goes after Jug and FP, maybe that's going to make Archie decide to try and go after him. But then, like, you know, Hermione might want to try and go after them to keep them hush, because she literally kills Minetta. Apparently, they've been having an affair for months, and she puts him down like it's nothing, just because she can't take the chance this all circles back to her. Too much is riding on it. Plus, she can't let, you know, Hiram find out the truth that she was the one behind him getting shot, because once again, he will not hesitate to get rid of her if need be, you know. So she's got to, you know, secure her own life. So I'm like curious of what's going to happen with the whole Minetta situation. Most of the city, most of the town already thinks he's dead. So it's like, yeah, leave it at that. It's like, oh yeah, you're alive. Oh no, you're dead now. You're super dead now. There's no faking that. So that's very interesting, like all across the board. Then you have the problems escalating even more, because Veronica, you know, trying to make sure that all the powers that be think everything's still kind of running smoothly. She kind of took over her dad's operations for a little while, kind of collecting money and stuff like that. Gets help from Smithers and Reggie. Interesting enough, I just realized this. I guess because he hasn't popped up for a while, I didn't realize the sheriff that, you know, Axel, Doc, Scarlet, and Julius meet in season 2 of Van Helsing. I know I'm going on a huge tangent here, but that's the same actor. I didn't realize that until I saw him in this episode. I was like, oh, I didn't correlate and put that together. But nevertheless, it's just kind of a side note thing. But yeah, now her dad's back, so she doesn't have to worry about that as much. But then there's a problem of, once again, Hermione made that deal selling the drugs and got the money up front, and those people, because she used it to pay off the governor, because it turns out it's a combination of why Hermione wanted to kill, you know, Hiram. Because one, it's like, oh yeah, because he literally had Tall Boy take a shot at her last season. There's that, but also because Veronica got caught up in this. Like, no matter what, it's like, that's my baby girl. You got her mixed up in all of this. She literally almost got poisoned, had this seizure and everything. I figured it had to be something behind that. Once again, like, I'm sure that's a detail she didn't really tell Veronica, because no one's supposed to know this, you know, so Jughead's got to keep this to himself. The only people that know the truth are him and FP. Can't let, you know, Betty 100% know the truth, and probably definitely can't let Veronica know the truth. But at the end of the day, Veronica doesn't want to know the truth. For her, it's like, it's enough to satisfy her dad, it's enough to satisfy her, but it's like, knowing the truth won't change anything. It's Riverdale. At the end of the day, it's like Riverdale has become this complicated mess, and for her, it's just like, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. It's just, I think it's more so like, everything that's happening is a byproduct of Riverdale becoming what it is. This cycle of anger, hate, and death, essentially. So it's kind of like there's so much darkness rooted in Riverdale that anything that goes down, it's Riverdale. Riverdale's behind every, terrible thing that kind of goes down. So no matter who it was that shot her dad, it's like, hey, at the end of the day, it was Riverdale that did it, because everything and everyone is a byproduct of kind of the darkness that is Riverdale. So I don't know. That's my initial thought about it, but we'll kind of have to wait and see about that. Like I said, I'm curious to see what Hiram does when he kind of gets back on his feet. With the drugs going, the wolves coming, because it's like, hey, we came for our drugs. Wait, you owe us a crap ton of money. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's going to have to be answered. I'm sure that's all going to be blamed on Tallboy. But like I said, that all comes down to whether or not Hiram's playing. Like, maybe he remembers more than he lets on. Maybe he was awake when Archie was there. So maybe he's actually secretly harboring feelings about that. But I think he was honestly unconscious the entire time. But just like, once again, like, why would Tallboy do that to him all of a sudden? Maybe it's just like he had something on Tallboy, but I feel like Tallboy had his undying loyalty being the Gargoyle King and all that. So I don't know. It's a lot to kind of process. I'm very interested to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Deadly Class. A very interesting episode. A lot of stuff went down, so let's break it down. First, let's start off with like the Jurgen storyline. That's kind of interesting because for him, he's very much like Marcus. He's kind of very anti-establishment to a certain degree. Because for him, it's like he came to King's Dominion because he's like, oh, I thought we were going to like rebalance the system and everything. But it's like, no, apparently not. All we're doing is keeping the powerful in powerful position. Because he looks at the legacies. It's like all the legacies, they have all the power and position. Their paths were already set for them. But what about the rats? The way he makes it seem, it's almost like all the previous year's rats haven't really risen up. Like, if you aren't from a good enough legacy and family, it's kind of like, what room is there for you to grow? The rats are the people we should be there, because the legacy people, I guess, are very content. They've always had this power. Let the new people come in, people like Marcus, Lex, Petra, and Billy, and shake shit up, essentially, Because it's interesting, because I think Jurgen, for him, he even says it in this episode, Marcus reminds him of himself in the sense of like, you remind me what this school was meant to do, bring essentially a change of some sort. Like I said, like kind of that rebellious nature. And it's so interesting, to the point like he's almost basically resigning, but Lynn's kind of like, you can't do that. This commitment was made for life, because this is essentially a suicide note. And it's also interesting too, because it seems like we kind of learn the ins and out of King's Dominion a little bit more, because basically there's someone that Lynn answers to. Even though the school is his, there's kind of like a board above him, because there's that lady who has that office where literally people are objects. Like, there's two dudes holding these books, like their bookshelf. One dude's holding the circle part of a table, because he's like the frame of the table or whatever, and she's using people like chairs. It's like, okay, that was some sort of commitment of theirs. And it's like, these people stay here like 12 hours a day and they don't break their commitment because they made a commitment, and too bad Jurgen, because Lynn wants to just let Jurgen walk, but she's like, that's not how we handle things. Essentially Jurgen has to die. But, Lynn's like, no. He's been good to us this entire time. The fact of the matter is he's kind of lost his way, but we'll just replace him. The fact of the matter is, he can keep a secret. He won't tell anyone our business and stuff like that. Also, it turns out he was actually in prison, and Lynn's dad broke him out because knowing the potential he had. But it's interesting because it seems like, I'm curious, like, is King's Dominion purely Lynn's, and that there's actually more King's Dominions like around the world? Because this whole thing was started by Lynn's dad. So, how did that whole thing of like, potentially a board and stuff like that come about? Or like I said, is it like a worldwide system where like there's school all over the place and she's kind of like the superintendent of all the assassin schools all over the place, or maybe just the ones here in the US? Like, I'm curious like how that whole thing works, but it's just interesting because I thought he was kind of top dog, but even he answers to someone else. I mean, there is like this code that's kind of put into place, this tradition. And that's kind of interesting because that's what a big part of this episode is about, tradition. And, even Jurgen brings it up. It's like Lynn has the potential to change things, but he refuses to. The fact of the matter is the school isn't what, it wasn't the way he remembers it when he was younger. The whole reason why he decided to teach here at King's Dominion, and even going as far as being like Lynn's not the same person that he was back then either, I mean, even when it's all said and done, Lynn had the chance, I like that. It's just, he's like, well, can you do me a favor and give me a head start? And he's like, he smells the poison in the drink, and he's like, Lynn was basically like, that was your head start, and they fight. But I was wondering whether he was going to do it, but he didn't. He couldn't kill Jurgen. But the fact of the matter is, they won't stop. Because I think, what Jurgen did say, I mean, for one, that's his friend, but I think also it probably hit him to think like, yeah, like, it's kind of interesting because it's like, Lynn has, he kind of fights for the system in a sense. It's like you give these people the potential to grow and become the killers they need to be to, giving them an outlet for their anger, like in Marcus's case. And it's just so interesting that, you're trying to give to them what was given to you, but it's like you're also very establishment. It's just kind of interesting because he seems like he's anti-establishment with what he's trying to do, give people to fight back against their oppressors. It's almost like you're leaning into the oppressor situation because of like this group that you answer to. It feels like in this regard you shouldn't have anyone you'd have to answer to, but that's just an interesting thing. I'm kind of curious to kind of broaden like that aspect out more and see what that ends up kind of entailing and learning more about that. Because even Lynn, we still don't know that much about. We know a little bit here and there. He's kind of told us about himself. But other than that, like a big part of this episode is, like I said, the whole legacy situation of like, it's basically legacies hazing rats. Like Billy, for example, getting his hands like, oh, I get it, haha, mouse chat. Like it's interesting. Like I think Billy kind of reminds me of myself, I think, in that regard of like Billy kind of smiles when he kind of feels like he kind of laughs everything off. I think that's his way of compensating. It's kind of his defense mechanism. It's just like, oh, you got me, you're so good. And, he's probably, even though he's really pissed and upset a lot of times, but that's his way of handling it. And so they kind of treat the rats like crap. Victor's doing the whole thing with Petra. I actually thought like the way he was hitting on her and stuff like that, it's like, oh wow, he really has a thing for her. Because I was like, we still don't 100% know why she really did what she did with Victor after Billy kind of confessed his feelings. Like once again, I'm still unsure whether that was just her trying. She's scared, to ruin things between her and Billy, and that was her reaction, or maybe she just doesn't look at Billy. That like I wasn't really sure what her whole situation was, and I still kind of don't. But yeah, I mean that, and it's because it's like, oh, Brandy's like, oh, this isn't where you belong, the legacy dance, like you shouldn't show up being there with a hunk like Victor. But it turns out the whole thing was an act. Victor was only pretending to be into her because, and it's so sad because like he was actually treating her sweet. They're actually kind of having a good time and stuff. He talked about the fact that there's no class system in Russia, but it's like, oh, a rat is still a rat. And, they kind of parade Petra around like, trying to play her, because the entire time, like, because they get treated like shit the entire episode, like, they get fed rats, but even, Marcus is like, yeah, it's not the first time I had rats too. Now that's kind of sad, because everyone else was kind of throwing up. I'm assuming Petra was too, and they were all aiming for revenge against the legacies, because, Marcus being, who he is, very anti-establishment. Him and Willie having their issues this episode because like him and Willie are having fun. Like I was assuming the first game they were playing was like Punch Out or whatever, and they're like, yeah. But the moment Shab comes back in, when it's like, yo, where's that $2 you owe me? Like he puts up that front and everything, and it actually kind of wears down on Marcus because he's like, oh, now you want to be my friend? Like the fact of the matter is, I can't be friends with someone who's actually ashamed of me. It's like you can't even be buddy with me. It's not even just like, oh, I got to keep up my rep. Like your rep allows you to have friends, but for him, it's like I am a legacy, you're a rat. I can't help the family I was born in. But the fact of the matter is, I think for him, it's like, it's interesting considering the fact is that Willie doesn't want to conform to his family in the sense of like, oh, I'm a pacifist, promising never to hurt anyone again. But, he has to keep up this persona being this tough guy, and he's letting his, position as a legacy kind of get in the way. It's just kind of an interesting thing on that level too. And Marcus was going to choose his battles, because even Jurgen was like, choose your battles wisely, learn what you need to learn to kind of do maximum damage, and then get the hell out of King's Dominion before the finals, because everything is tipped in the scales of the legacies. It seems like, we don't know how long it's been, but it seems like it's been a long time since like the rats have ever had a chance to kind of come up and everything. So, but after Petra was kind of paraded around like that, the only legacy that was there that didn't kind of like enjoy that situation is I think Willie's the same way too. I think he's kind of like Marcus. He doesn't like a bully, because that was like Marcus's whole thing, which interestingly enough, I should also talk about that. The teachers, there's a teacher of psychopathy, which French Stewart, from Third Rock from the Sun, and also Christopher Haidar, geez, so many freaking things, but obviously most recently, like, playing Sam on Van Helsing, so it's just kind of like, what? So they're all both teachers, so that's kind of interesting. But Marcus, I guess it is, you know, because it's interesting because Marcus has always made it clear, like, you know, in previous episodes, like, am I trying to be an anti-bully dude because, you know, that's just who I am? Like, I guess maybe it plays into, like, his very, you know, anti-establishment mentality, but it's also interesting because it's like, even he kind of thinks, like, here I am even playing this role of, like, oh, I don't like bullies. I just, almost like he thinks it's almost an excuse, you know? So I wonder, is that really how he feels? It feels like that might be the way he kind of steps to people like that. Like, he doesn't like, you know, because he also realizes it's like, yo, like, you know, if I'm, you know, I'm supposed to choose my fights, you know, and if I'm not going to fight for my friends, who am I going to fight for? So it's like, hey, kind of acknowledging that this group, you know, of rats are his friends. And when the time came, you know, they're darting everyone with mellow yellow. The fact of the matter is, Willie had his back. Willie wasn't going to fight Chico, but the fact is he stood up for Marcus when the time came. So I thought that was kind of pretty neat. I also love, like, how the atypical combat teacher, that being Christopher Heidal's character, being the whole situation of, like, he likes Marcus a lot because, like, Saya and Maria, like, were trying to do their whole, like, sneaking in thing, being stealthy and stuff until Marcus made a whole bunch of noise, but he adapted because, like, for him it's like not everything is going to go according to plan, so he's just like, yo, but the way he's like, yeah, and Marcus is going to be like, yeah, just kind of like it seems like he's impressed by the fact is that Marcus was kind of able to adapt. It's like, even though he kind of screwed up in the beginning, it's like he's still kind of go with the flow type of thing of, like, you got to make the most out of any situation. So I thought it was kind of interesting. It's also, this episode also presented an interesting thing about Maria and Saya's friendship and stuff like that, because obviously we see them bond. It's also interesting because, like, you know, Maria's like all about, like, oh, you know, I want books and a house one day, you know, filled with kids. Saya's kind of like, nah, I'm gonna party it up, you know, and rule the world. But, you know, I'll stop by every once in a while. Because both of them kind of get labeled. She gets labeled, like, Maria gets labeled crazy. Saya gets really labeled as the bitch. So it seems like they both kind of probably bond in that regard too, just being like, you know, screw what people think about us, but, you know, it still, I think, weighs on you to a certain extent. And what's interesting is that Chico says later on, because, like, he couldn't leave Maria alone. That is the thing, like, she's asking for one night away. She just needs a break from him, and it's just everything that is him is just a little overbearing. He's just, I guess, because it kind of shows you in his mind that, like, he doesn't look at Maria as, like, oh, someone I love. I think for him it's just like, she's just a prize. She's just a possession, you know? And, you know, kind of brings it up to Saya, like, hey, like, the fact is that story she told you, oh, she's been telling that for years. It's not like, oh, you're special and just like, oh, that was some heart-to-heart moment you felt and had. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, Saya kind of acts like everything's okay. So I don't know whether that's something Maria did prepare her for, because she was like, oh, he said what you pretty much said he would say. Like, is that real, or was she just kind of making it seem like everything is okay when in actuality it's not? I don't know. Like, in a sense of, like, she's like, oh yeah, let's drink, and they're laughing and stuff, but it's like, does she really feel like that, or will she not look at Maria the same way? Of just, I'm wondering, did Maria actually prepare her about what Chico was going to say? Because Chico was like, oh, I just told her who you really are. That, I guess, like, Maria, I guess, kind of puts up this front to kind of look like she's vulnerable with people, but when in actuality she isn't. She just gets close to people just because that's almost kind of like her thing, to kind of get information from them, to kind of really know them. So I don't know, we'll see in the end. What's interesting though is at the end, like, there is that student who's getting that money and a picture of Saya. So I don't think that's a kill situation. I think that's like a keep an eye on Saya. Like, I don't know, maybe that's related to her parents or something like that. Because, you know, we've heard a little bit about some of the families, but beyond that, we haven't really heard, you know, and too much in Saya's case. I think she's much like Lynn, kind of an enigma in a certain regard. To be fair, we don't really know that much about, you know, Brandy either. We haven't dived down that route. What's also interesting, it seems like the guy that is looking for Marcus is the one who gave him the scar. I didn't really put two and two together. Like, just because he seemed like he was older, but I guess that's, you know, whatever. But he was like, yo, I'm essentially, I made you, you know, stronger because of that. So, and also looked like Marcus had a bomb or something in his hand. So it's like, what's up with that? So, like, Marcus said that he didn't kill all those people, but it's like, Could it be the fact is he made the thing, like he was going to make a bomb, but he didn't go through with it? Someone else used it potentially, so maybe that's what that's kind of implying. Also, I love that. That's apparently going to be an aesthetic thing they do the entire season, is going to be those things. It seems like there's going to be at least one section every episode that has those. It'll probably be at different points throughout the episode, because this one was like at the beginning. The other one, I guess, like from first episode was like in the middle. Second one probably in the middle. It's gonna be all over the place. So I'm just glad that they're keeping that. I just like the design of that and the aesthetic of it too. It seems like specifically it's just used like as a flashback situation of like when you're looking at someone's past, it's always going to be animated like that. So that was kind of interesting. So I'm very interested to see where all this ends up taking us with all that, because, like I said, Marcus is being hunted down. Apparently, someone's keeping an eye on Saya. Maybe that is kind of a hit situation. Like I said, it looked like, you know, the language it was written in, like that might be, you know, someone from her situation, like Saya or something. Because I was thinking, like, could it be from Chico? But it's like, no, I feel like it wouldn't be written like that. I feel like it'd be probably written in English or something if it was like Chico or something. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong about that. We will just have to wait and see about all that. Also, I can't skip over it, but they did have that nice moment at the end with Billy and Petra. It does make you wonder where things are going to go from there. You know, Billy being there for her and everything. It's like, yeah, we were kind of busting your balls a little bit earlier, but you're always going to be, you know, one of us. Like, there's kind of them and us, which once again, that's kind of an interesting aspect to this. I wasn't expecting that there is that kind of like teen drama aspect to it. But it's teen drama in this very twisted, messed up world of kids being trained to be killers, you know, and it's just kind of interesting. And I'm curious to see, you know, that aspect kind of develop more, because it's like, even under these circumstances, you know, Marcus has brought it up before of like how, like, even different areas, same shit, you know, there's still that hierarchy of just like, you know, the popular people and then treating other people, you know, who are less popular or not as well in a well enough position, you know, treating them like shit and stuff like that. So it was just kind of an interesting thing to kind of see, like, even killers get trained to be killers have same issues as any other teenager. So I think that's kind of a nice blend of this series, doing that aspect of it as well. So what I also like to, I should also talk about, is that little aspect of, like, obviously Marcus isn't all about patriotism, because it's like having pride in the government and stuff like that in his mind. But for Willie, it's like, nah, where I come from, it's like, government's never done anything for us or will do anything for you. So it's like, patriotism is for your community, having pride in the people who are kind of like, you know, your family, and so your people is who you look out for. That's who you fight for. And Marcus is kind of like, oh, so that means I'm part of your people, which is kind of interesting. And I'm curious to see how that dynamic grows, because, you know, I'm sure that's going to lead to Willie treating, you know, Marcus a little bit differently around everyone, you know, because Marcus is the only one who knows the truth about Willie and kind of accepts him for being who he is. But what's that going to mean when all the worlds kind of blend together, him being, you know, tight with, you know, the legacies in certain regard, because, you know, he's got, you know, he's cool with, you know, with Willie, you know, obviously like Maria and Saya, I would say, but he's also, obviously he's a rat, but he's cool with the rats too. So I think ultimately that's going to be the thing where it's like, Marcus might kind of bridge the gap for a lot of that. Just kind of, you know, he is all about kind of burning everything down. So, you know, this hierarchy, this positioning and stuff like that, like, it's never mattered to him and it won't matter to him. And maybe that's just going to be where his story ends up taking us in that regard. I don't know. That was just kind of something floating in my head. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good